one, which is in English. It's a topic which I thought that Singaporeans or even friends from the region can ponder upon this topic, and let's discuss it later after my presentation. Right. The title that I just made just a slight amendment here on the subtitle. The title still maintains the heritage in texts and books, but the subtext I add here amidst the euphoria of heritage making. Yeah, just to give I think a more focused point to the lecture. Allow me to begin with a quote from Leopard Senor. He was Senegalese poet and politician, and he written a number of fabulous poems, and one of the founding fathers of the negritude movement amongst Black intellectuals. He says, to preserve the testimony of creative thinkers and to render their manuscript accessible to international research is an act of profound civic importance whereby we affirm our identity and maintain the life and continuity of our cultural heritage. The cultural heritage is not a dusty monument, a souvenir of the past restricted to scholarly elite, but the focus of a form of ancestor worship which vitalizes and enriches later generation. I think that it's an affirmation of the importance of cultural heritage, and to the point here, pointing directly on manuscripts, which is actually the subject matter of our lecture this evening. And allow me to add another quotation from the renowned critic and humanist scholar, of course, you know Edward Said, famous for his book on Orientalism. He says this: it was the book that came to symbolize for me what Vico called the heroic powers of human imagination. As reader and author, I have never failed to see in what we read and write the profoundest strivings of which the mind is capable, and which, whether in success or failure, suggests to me the nobility of effort required to achieve moments of insights, acts and interpretation, and above all, sustained performances of the humane and critical understanding that can ennoble and emancipate human beings. Yeah, I think that's more powerful here. It's about book itself, right? The heroic power of human imagination. And in this lecture, I'll put forward the idea of heritage imagination. Yeah? And part of that heritage imagination is actually in our affirmation of the book, the text, and all other related manuscripts and documents. Yeah. All right. Let's look a bit on the world of heritage, right? I mean, it is pronounced in 1972 by UNESCO World Heritage Convention that the cultural and natural heritage is among the priceless and irreplaceable assets not only of each nation but of humanities as a whole. The loss through deterioration and disappearance of any of these most prized assets constitutes an impoverishment of the heritage of all peoples of the world. And no wonder today, consciously many governments, right, looking very closely in cooperation with UNESCO to preserve their cultural and narrative heritage. Part of that heritage, because of their exceptional qualities, can be considered to be outstanding universal value, and as such worthy of special protection against the danger which is increasingly threatening them. Right? Sometimes the threat may not be an overt one. Yeah? Sometimes it's also about the violence of forgetting. Right? That can also be a serious threat. Yeah? The violence of forgetting, I think, is also as equally serious as one that caused by the ravages of war and conflict. Yeah? Um, in the intangible cultural heritage, of course, we have heard this one of lately, ICH, and in the past, I think the priority given to what we call it physical heritage, built heritage, right? Now there's more emphasis given to ICH, especially in the case of Singapore. And I think this is a good sign. It's a good development, and we sometimes wonder too, the realms of say literature, books, languages, yeah, how do they fall? Is it under that physical heritage or is it under ICH? Right? I'm not going to do a debate on classification here, but I think it's most importantly we recognize that whether it is tangible or intangible cultural heritage, right? Certainly the domain of books, texts, and others, yeah, must be consciously be part of our heritage consciousness and planning. Right? Let me just read a bit here. The term cultural heritage has changed content considerably in recent decades, partially owing to instruments developed by UNESCO. Cultural heritage does not end at monuments and collection of objects. It also includes tradition of living expression inherited from our ancestors and passed on to our descendants, such as oral tradition. And today, in many parts of the world, oral tradition has been um, transformed into textual text and become books, right? So from one can say from an intangible domain to a more tangible domain, yeah. Performing arts, social practices, ritual, festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe, or the knowledge and skills to produce traditional crafts. Yeah. All right. This is you can look through at the UNESCO webpage. You can there are more details on that, or even from our heritage board. Right. So what about books, text, literary, epistolary heritage? Right? Have we been given attention on this domain? Right? So the recent enthusiasm, based on my reading, an initiative to preserve and conserve the heritage is of course commendable, and considerable resources have been allocated towards it. It is part of ascertaining social memory generally for the task of preserving cultural heritage, while the aim of public education and taking pride in the making of national identity. We know about that, or community identity, or ethnic identity. The preservation will, this presentation, sorry, will discuss the relegation, somehow the relegation of books and textual heritage that which the point that I want to make is that it should form part of our heritage imagination. And what is this heritage imagination? First is the recognition, right, that the domain of books, the domain of text, manuscript, epistles, and so on related to that are part and parcel of the human achievement. Yeah, in fact, an excellent achievement of certain civilization, of a cultural unit, of a regional space, and so on. So this is, I think, as the quotation I gave earlier on Edward's side, I think it's important for us to give ample recognition of the literary and textual domain, yeah, of heritage. And second one, of course, it is celebrating it, right? Not just to recognize it, we need to celebrate it, meaning there are ample spaces that we bring attention that these are works, these are objects, these are human creation that needs to be given not just recognition, but to celebrate it, celebrate the ideas, even celebrate the texture. Yeah, and I think this is has been done occasionally. Among others, I think in 2019, when we have bicentennial, I remember there is an exhibition from NLB on paper. That is one example of celebrating, yeah, our textual literary heritage. Yeah, of course, in that exhibition, there were many other documents, including maps and other paintings. Yeah. So the heritage imagination demands the endeavor for preserving and documenting. I think this is where in many communities and many nations, due to the lack of resources, at this point becomes very challenging, right? So when we talk about heritage imagination, we need to consider all these 6 points that I enumerated here. The fourth one is actually very important. The moment after we preserve, we document, or even when we acquire, right? No point we acquire and we document and we preserve, and there's a lot of resources involved, and it just stay in the gallery or in the libraries, yeah, or in the archives. Right? All these materials need to be given a reading, yeah, which means discussing about it, analyzing it, and of course later on disseminating it, which is of course the realm of education. So discussing and educating comes together after ample preserving and documenting has been done. And all these are actually will not be able to be carried out well without any planning. Planning is important, and this is part and parcel of what we call cultural planning. It's not just about taking pride that our collection is one of the best in the world, but planning means consciously floating the heritage domain in the cultural imagination of the people, which becomes a living heritage rather than just a dead heritage. Right? And lastly, I think that heritage imagination demands our sharing and recreating. Yeah? I think this is where it is part like discussing and educating and celebrating, but sharing here, I mean sharing with the rest of the world, because the human attainment and achievement in the cultural world, yeah, especially in the literary or textual, the elements of being a world literature, right, or a world text, yeah, I think it's important for us to recognize it adequately and for us to take proactive steps by sharing it, such as turning it into digital material, turning it into a translated materials, yeah, or recreating it, yeah, through various platform of transmedia efforts. I think this is important, where if we look at heritage imagination and we focus on the literary and textual materials, all these 6 points I think are important. I'm sorry that I started with these points because it sounds like it's a bit too technical, but later on in the second part of the lecture, then I think more materials and more example from the region and from Singapore itself will be given. Yeah. So we are actually in the midst of heritage making. And of course, heritage making involves also what we call politics of heritage. Right? Scholar by the name of Laura Jane Smith, I think, put it this very well, that heritage is a cultural process that individuals and society engage in to negotiate not only the meaning of the past, but the ways in which past is used to legitimize or to remake cultural and political values and narratives. Yeah? So she says that museum collection, heritage sites, yeah, are not in and of themselves heritage, but rather cultural tools that are utilized in active performance of heritage creation. Right? So this is important. These are just tools or platform or instrument. What's important to note is that heritage is a performance intimately tied up with the legitimation of identity, belonging, and sense of place, but it's negotiated process of performance in which heritage meaning or heritage making are constantly made and remade for the needs of the present. And if you look at the thing that the 6 points that I have deliberated here, this is what I think constitute heritage imagination and linked up with Laura Jane's idea of heritage as cultural processes. Yeah, I mean, this is something we need to ponder very seriously rather than just accepting heritage as something like a given list, right? And for us to just recognize, cherish, and then just be happy about it. Yeah, we need to be more sophisticated to know that the realm of heritage making, nevertheless, is also a side of competing interest. Yeah? So what we have, right, in this heritage making, there's a possibility of a euphoria. On the one hand, it's good that heritage making enhance, right, the consciousness, enhance the endeavor, the efforts in making, in boosting and nurturing heritage preservation, but that euphoria itself can lead, or rather can demonstrate to us some dimension which is not productive and which is not necessary. Among others, what I will see first is there is a celebration which I think which is good, but a celebration without the cerebral, meaning that there is a lot of hoo-ha kind of taking pride of our heritage, but actually there's no serious effort in reflecting and researching and in giving meaning to the heritage item that we have recognized. And then, of course, this reminds us the second point on the fervor of listing means we are more enthusiastic to fulfill the list. And then, for example, be it our national list or be it the UNESCO list, we only going for that which only can becomes rather bureaucratic in its approach, but not about discussing it. Yeah, so the dimension of heritage as part of public consciousness becomes relegated because all efforts are made about wanting to put the list, and especially in the context of competing neighbors and region that also have equally similar cultural tropes, then it becomes a more more kind of like a game to be first in the listing, right? And of course, we know that in all heritage making or in that listing that we favor, that included lists itself are not inclusive, right? Of course, heritage making right, needs to seriously think about the best possible to include many, right? Maybe not necessarily that we need to follow the global standard of listing, but just the listing based on our own community needs. Yeah, because I think if we join the bigger global list, each country will need to just represent maybe one or two items. But because there are many other countries also presenting their list, and in each country itself there are diverse cultures, peoples, yeah, and tradition, and that will make the work of what is the favorite list becomes ever more complicating and challenging, right? So in the sense that there is a competition for entry, but not cooperation to celebrate heritage, right? And I think that will be utterly unproductive. More so when we realize that cultural product, which we call heritage today, has no geopolitical boundaries. Cultures has no political boundaries, right? So this is where I think if we lessen that kind of competition for entry, there's a possibility that there could be cooperation, yeah, for heritage making. Maybe I sound a bit idealistic, but I think this is not impossible. And of course, there is a possibility of elitism in the selection and preference. This has happened in many societies and communities whenever heritage making lists have been made. The technocratic approach bereft of collective ethos. This is one example of how the bureaucracy can be very efficient in running heritage affairs, but the collective ethos might be lacking due to perhaps even alienated from the cultural traditions of the living community, right? And lastly, I think there is, of course, nothing escape from capital interest, which dictate heritage making and even heritage selection. Yeah, capital interest by, of course, the market forces. Okay. So now, having said that all these challenges, nevertheless, my lecture points to the need to recognize the literary heritage. Yeah, literary here can be what I call it, the text, yeah, the text, the books, and so on. Be it manuscript, printed version, alongside text pertaining to our political, historical, cultural, and social past, are our historical witness, right? In as much as they are part of our intellectual and artistic nation of a people or nation. Today, we are witnessing the very ideas of heritage being expanded, contested, and elevated. But with limited resources, alongside political and cultural expediencies, the business of heritage management cannot escape from the fact of politics of heritage, which I've mentioned earlier. This encompasses inclusion and exclusion. Some are deliberate preference, some simply unthought of, and some for lack of expertise and resources. And if I may add here, also being alienated from the cultural tradition of a place, right? There's a possibility too. So the significance of literary heritage, I would say, here book and manuscript and the rest, speaks volume of our cultural achievement and as a good measure of our humanity or its lack thereof. That the book, literary books, manuscript, and the rest, it encapsulates and remind us of our cultural and artistic embeddedness, especially in our own locality. It provides insights into our historical past of groups in competition, and it has a longer staying power, meaning books itself have a longer staying power where many other platform or instrument could have perished, right? A building, let's say in Southeast Asia, yeah, in the Malay world, many wooden structures have perished, you know, over the period of time. But books, manuscript, able to stay slightly longer, although paper in Southeast Asia will also cannot stay for long. But because of the efforts made in the rewriting of the text, yeah, the manuscripts, yeah, before the arrival of the print machine, yeah, that in itself allowed for a longer staying power of many texts. And of course, these texts later on have potentiality of transmedia, inspiring other literary and artistic creation, and even it is shifted to other cultural groupings, meaning via translation. Yeah. So how, let's say, a Malay text in Aceh is published, written in 1603, titled Tajus Salatin, written by Buhari al-Jauhari, survive until today throughout Southeast Asia with one of the largest text distribution in terms of manuscript, but also being included in various other works in the Minangkabau region and in the Javanese domain. Yeah, meaning that these texts, Malay written texts from Aceh, yeah, transferred and migrated throughout the region, right? And these texts can be found all throughout the Nusantara. But then we need to ask the reason for neglect and relegation, because the heritage business has predominantly in the areas of historical sites, monument, material culture, artistic creation, and even the natural environment. I find it a bit strange here. Although by technicality, books, text, manuscripts, episode could be included as what they call it, material culture, yeah, you know, as in material. But then, even then, we don't see much of it, yeah, because it has been relegated to libraries and institutes of higher learning, right? For some reason, and when we talk about intangible cultural heritage, the focus is mainly on all other performances and the oral tradition, but not the book, yeah, itself, not the manuscript itself, right? So there is some kind of technicality problem here. Yeah, this neglect or relegation is exacerbated by our attitude towards historical past. Undeveloped historical cultural literacy mean we see no importance for preserving our historical past. The past is not part of the corpus for our identity formation and efforts. Our attitude towards literature, right? So this is another problem too. Yeah, generally seeing literature as artistic business or RAM or preoccupation having little link to the mainstream cultural and social life. Manuscript appreciation is tied to literature. Without the interest of the latter, it means literature, therefore there's no space for recognition. And therefore, text, books, manuscript heritage is given less and less and less emphasis. The dominant historical approach then also puts little premium on indigenous writings, because this manuscript in foreign libraries and museums still remain in overseas holding without efforts to acquire a copy or long-term loan, or even to make the reproduction. Yeah, I think this is you know, by a certain kind of historical standpoint, where many of these literary texts are deemed as not the kind of legitimate materials for historical veracity. Yeah. All right. The fourth point is underdeveloped library and archival institution. Administrative and technical expertise are there, but the research and development component is very much lacking. So I think this is, you know, in many communities. I wouldn't want to say for Singapore, but I think over the years, I think we have done better, more so when we know that our library and archival institution have been under one roof, and therefore I think there must be some good coordination being made. Yeah? Whereas in some other countries, they are separated. Manuscript and text holding in diverse foreign places and institutions, so accessibility becomes costly. This is actually the product of colonial era. Many of our texts here, and I will show you example later how texts written and produced in this island, yeah, could nowhere be found much in our very own collection. Untrained personnel or lack of expertise in the library and archival sector, philologists and curatorial expertise seems uncoordinated and few in numbers by virtue of training. Mainstream heritage business put less emphasis on it due to lack of knowledge or interest. Marketing and sponsorship on textual tradition seems to be more challenging, right? And of course, the ideological proclivities and the choice of text at the gatekeeper level This, I think, is the real challenge. This is tied to the historical attitude of the dominant establishment, looking at the literary heritage of a certain period, of certain time, of certain community. So this is actually amongst the challenges. Yeah? So why literary tradition is significant to be given attention now? Because, as I've mentioned earlier, it is an intellectual and artistic creation of the people's past. It shows an organic link with the endogenous tradition and openness to exogenous sources. From the realm of literature itself, you can see the cultural embeddedness, the cultural dynamism of the people. The tradition of paper and book making, the inroad of printing technology and the establishment of publishing houses and its dissemination, all these tell us, yeah, about the world of books, the world of, and actually the world of ideas. Yeah, insights into the authorial biography and ideology and the tradition that inform the textual writings. I think, I think this is a straight point that I think it suffices for us to affirm the importance of the textual heritage. So the textual heritage in relegation, right? Is that so? I'm putting here a question mark, right? The that heritage institutions are subjected to expectation of generating responses, attendance, blah blah blah. So imagine, right? If you put literature or manuscript, right? Uh, you know, then it might not be fulfilling a certain key KPI, key performance index, because the turnout will be low and therefore it cannot justify later on in the coming budget. And therefore, again, yeah, just because of the number of turnout, therefore, turnout is low for any textual books or literary exhibition or sharing session. It means that more lesser time to be given in the next running. So this is what happened, right? So however, if this bureaucratic expectation could be overcome, another important obstacle is the political will of the ruling establishment. Meaning that, let's say we tell, well, you can't use the KPI, for the exhibition, let's say the exhibition on the sports heritage, let's say, on built heritage, for instance, which has a more popular attraction, right? As compared to a textual, literary, and book exhibition. Then, if we can convince the bureaucrats that run the show, I think it's possible to convince them. But at the end of the day, it's still very much depending on the political will, yeah, of the ruling establishment. The literary heritage becomes the most neglected, and very little efforts are made to boost the philological and discursive mechanism. Here I would say, if it's literary culture of today, meaning novels, poem, short stories, yeah, essays, I think it's more or less given attention. But I'm talking here about literary heritage, means these are old works, yeah, old works that that we inherited, yeah, from the earlier generation, because all these require philological reading, discursive mechanism that ensure that this manuscript or literature in general remains an integral in the cultural and historical imagination of the people. In addition, it is not uncommon in academia, due to certain academic proclivities, literary materials are deemed as simply as texts or old texts, just as dead texts belonging to an old era or dead era, while some other see literature as belonging to a specific realms of scholarship or expertise, and have aversion in linking literary texts with society's thought and culture. So we have two diversity. On the one hand, one would see that, well, it's just dead text, it's no longer important, right? We can read, but it doesn't, it is not much as compared to a more positivistic outlook of empirical study. And another group will only see literature as literary text itself, not about literature having an organic link with the society, thought, and culture. So here we are facing another challenge. The last one, to address this challenge become imperative because in the age of digital frenzy and diminutive passion for intellectual and literary heritage. So again here, I need to emphasize that the heritage making in the realms of books, texts, and manuscript become ever more challenging. Well, let's look at the world of textual production. This is just giving you an example here, right? Just of one author or one text itself, you can see from a manuscript text, which is written by hand, to a text which is transferred or made available via a lithograph printing production, which is, which comes slightly later because the printing itself revolutionized the manuscript tradition, especially in Malay work. And of course, that is not just enough. After that, the Europeans, the colonial scholars have a great interest on some of these leading texts, for example, of Abdullah Munshi's Hikat Abdullah, right? It was translated, right? This is translated by Chalabert, and of course, there's also a translation in French, right? Back in the 19th century, yeah. And of course, if you look at later on, the Malay text of Hikat Abdullah being transliterated. This is translated, this is transliterated. Yeah, can you imagine? Transliterated into Romanized Malay and to be used in school. And today, in my class, I'm teaching classical Malay literature. We use this version in class, right? And then, of course, there is a more thorough philological study comparing various versions of the manuscript, right? Or the various version of the text. It becomes a scientific addition. Like, for example, the one here that I'm showing here by Amin Sweeney. Amin Sweeney is a renowned scholar in Malay studies that have done fabulous job in editing a few texts or classical Malay texts and the study of those texts too. Yeah, and then that is not just that. You see how big this world of books and world of text, right? Having said that, in the modern era, in the 20th and 21st century, then you begin to see the scholarship on Abdullah's work itself, right? Very recently, Professor Hadijan Rahmat had just launched her book, 2-volume on Abdullah bin Abdul Qadir Munshi. I think this is a great opportunity for Singaporeans to read on Abdullah Munshi's ideas and work, and I think Hadijah have done it very well. We have a Malaysian author, Zahari Rashid, who wrote this. This is Siti Aisyah Murad. This is a primer that used in school in IHL. This is Darus Ahmad, Munshi Abdullah. This is actually a kind of what I call it, kind of introduction to Munshi Abdullah's work. And of course, in Sanjay Krishnan's a PhD thesis, which turned to a book, Reading the Global, where parts of the thesis also discuss about Munshi Abdullah's ideas. Yeah, so you can see here, the world of manuscripts turned to the world of books and the world of discursive or scholarship articulation. So it's a huge world. Right? I'm just saying one author here. I'm not saying that. What about the rest? Yeah. So so now let's say that's one big enormous realm. Another one is actually challenging in exhibiting text manuscript. That manuscript or literature has little visible attraction. We know that. Nor it could generate a sustained demonstrative effect for a long time. In fact, I'm not surprised even within campus community, right? They have also allergic to text or to literature. That's very strange. Yeah? What more those outside campus? Yeah? But if heritage business is all about generating audience and fundraising an attraction to public and tourist interest, then this literary heritage will forever remain relegated. And this is the reason why I took up this lecture, yeah, talking about the euphoria of heritage making. At the end of the day, these are serious points that we need to consider. And this scholar by the name of Graham Foster says that manuscripts, unlike paintings or historical objects, are not just physical artifacts. They contain plenitude of words and meanings that cannot be overwhelmingly prospect for museum visitor. To make those uninitiated connect with manuscript and live enlightened is the chief challenge of the literary exhibition. I think this is, a task of any heritage institution, including Malay Heritage Center, right? Because I noted that in various occasions, Malay Heritage Center exhibition attempts to include, some literary in the exhibition, but or at least, right, the topics, on the exhibition themes, being included in its lecture repertoire, right? The discussion on certain texts. I think at least, it kind of like complement, right? It may not be the exhibition, but it's incorporated within the exhibition period itself. Last one, actually the recent one, which is still showing, still exhibited at Malay Heritage Center. It is the Urang Banja. There you can see the what we call it, lecture on Hikayat Banja, which I have the privilege to share with the rest. Right? Yeah, that's when I think late last year. Yeah, I can't remember. I mean, just after the exhibition was open. The challenges of manuscript acquisition, preservation, and publication. Right. So this is where I think not just in its exhibiting, but also the rest. Yeah. The business of acquiring, conserving, curating literary manuscript and text have been an arduous task in as much as it is costly. In this region, countries like Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and even Singapore face problems of acquiring and maintaining an exclusive manuscript textual collections. Yeah, some countries like Indonesia have huge textual collection, but I think the infrastructure, the system of collection may not be as efficient as let's say, when we compare to Singapore, right? I mean, Singapore, for the fact that we have a huge budget on the library collection, I think we benefit from over time, right? The continuous effort being made to collect the best collection from the region, and especially those that emerge from Singapore, right, or related to Singapore. In the Indonesian